We have Choyce moderating the panel today, and I'm just going to read you a little bit about Choyce. Choyce is our ACIC PEI Provincial Coordinator. Though she was born in Nova Scotia, Choyce has now spent most of her life in rural PEI with her parents and grandmother. Choyce holds a Bachelor's of Environmental Studies from UPEI and returned to UPEI to receive a Master's of Environmental Sciences in May this year. Her thesis focused on designing an app for extreme weather preparation, response, and recovery on PEI, which she feels has only become more relevant after Hurricane Fiona. Working in the nonprofit sector is Choyce's way of continuing to dedicate herself to community. So I'll turn it over to you, Choyce, to introduce the panelists.
Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. So thank you all for joining us, whether that's in person or online. And thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. Just so that the panelists know, these microphones are a little bit particular. You do need to hold them pretty close to your mouth for them to work well. So joining me today is Dr. Patrick Augustine on my far right, followed by Fredy, Duqes, and Janelle Frail. Patrick has asked that I introduce him with his bio, as has Fredy, and then I will allow Janelle to introduce herself. Patrick Augustine, a Mi'kmaq from New Brunswick with ancestral ties to Signiptuk and Abegwit, now resides in Elsipogtog First Nation. Currently serving as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Indigenous Knowledge, Education, and Applied Studies at UPEI, Patrick holds a PhD from Carleton University. With over 3 decades of experience, Patrick has been a dedicated contributor to Indigenous organizations at a local, provincial, regional, national, and international level. His journey includes notable roles such as a research officer at the First Nations Center of the National Aboriginal Health Organization, and later as a valued member of their board of directors. Patrick's experience extends to various research areas, including Mi'kmaq gaming, Wabanaki history, addiction rehabilitation, traditional healing, Aboriginal health research, and First Nations health policy. His commitment to Indigenous communities and academic pursuits makes him a vital figure in advancing Indigenous knowledge and practices. That's quite impressive. That's an impressive list. Fredy, sorry. Fredy Duqes has worked for 20 years with public sector entities and international cooperation agencies in projects related to food security, infrastructure, and territorial development. His areas of expertise and experience include strengthening value chains in the agricultural and forestry sector, development of solidarity economy enterprises, construction of community infrastructure, and strategic planning for rural development. Fredy is an economist from the National University of Columbia and holds a master's degree in development practice from the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center in Costa Rica. He is a fellow of the Japan World Bank Joint Program. Also a very impressive list. And to introduce herself, here's Janelle Frail.
Hi, thank you so much. I didn't quite know that everyone would be read to, but I'm happy to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Frail, and I use she, her pronouns, and I live in area unceded Mi'kmaq territory in Nova Scotia called Tabaganagadie. To make my list a little longer, not as long as these two, but I do have a science degree in environmental studies and also a public relations diploma, which I have tried to use to communicate about environmental and now climate change, change in words there. Have experience in adult education as well. And currently I work for CLIMAtlantic, CLIMAtlantic combo word, engagement and operation manager there. And just to speak very briefly about CLIMAtlantic, it's a newish organization. Before then, I was working with wonderful ACIC for a long time. So it was great to see some faces I've seen before and to make some new acquaintances as well. And CLIMAtlantic works with municipalities, NGOs, other governments, Indigenous, provincial governments, to try to help people adapt to climate change. And I also had a few other notes here I wanted to say. Oh, I wrote this, I thought about it the other day, is usually I'm on the other side organizing things. So it's neat and it's also nerve-wracking to be on a panel, but I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for the invitation. I also am here as a long time, not as long as some people volunteering with Breaking the Silence, but as a long time volunteer with Breaking the Silence Guatemala Maritime Solidarity Network. So I like to think that I can bring that perspective to the panel as well. And I was first involved with BTS, or Breaking the Silence, in 2007 as an International Youth Internship intern, which is very exciting to know that ACIC may get that at some point again, because I know they applied.
Thank you, Janelle. So the rest of this panel is going to be a series of questions in which our panelists will each have the chance to answer. Some of the questions may be directed to specific panelists, some to any, but the final 10 or 15 minutes of the presentation will also be a Q&A period, so people from the audience, whether that's in person or online, will have a chance to ask our panelists some questions. So we'll start it off a little bit simple. It has been well documented that different areas of the world feel the effects of climate change differently and to varying intensities. What are some of the costs you have seen in the areas in which you work and live? I think we'll start with Fredy on this one, if that's okay with Fredy. He's joining us from Colombia. It's wonderful to have a very different perspective, and then maybe hear from Patrick and then Janelle, if that works for everyone.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you speak in Spanish or maybe in English. I'm gonna try to speak in Spanish, and I feel more comfortable after I could start with English. And Sofía is gonna help me. Ok, primero que todo también quisiera agregar a la presentación de las razones por las que estoy acá. Es que trabajo con la Fundación Indígena del Forest Stewardship Council, del FSC. La Fundación Indígena es una organización de carácter internacional que trabaja con, para y por los pueblos indígenas. Estoy invitado, agradezco mucho la invitación por parte de ACIC y por parte de Venture to Impact para acompañarles en este espacio.
Gracias, Fredy. Hi, everyone. I will be translating for Fredy, interpreting. So I'll go ahead. Also, I wanted to come here and say why the reasons as to why I'm here. I'm also a part of the FICIF, which is a Forest Stewardship Council of Indigenous Foundation, where we work for Indigenous, the Indigenous population. And well, I just wanted to give a big thanks for the ACIC and also Venture to Impact for bringing me here.
Y pues efectivamente, desde la Fundación Indígena nosotros estamos desarrollando programas orientados a promover los derechos y el desarrollo de los pueblos indígenas, y esta pregunta obviamente me motiva a hablar de cuáles son estos costos que efectivamente están relacionados con los pueblos indígenas, porque los pueblos indígenas son los grupos que más están siendo vulnerados frente a los cambios, frente a lo que está presentando en los cambios climáticos, y obviamente teniendo en cuenta diferentes situaciones que están relacionadas con su ubicación, con su situación económica, con la vulneración de sus derechos. Y por eso creo que es importante que les pueda compartir algunos temas que nos permitan entender el por qué los pueblos indígenas son de los que están más sufriendo los costos relacionados con el cambio climático.
And well, according to the Indigenous Foundation, here we are developing programs to promote the rights and also the development of the Indigenous communities. And also I want to talk about the costs that the Indigenous communities are having and why they are one of the most vulnerable groups when talking about climate change. I also want to talk about the differences of the locations, the costs, and also some of their human rights. So that's what I will be talking about, mostly the cost for the Indigenous communities.
Creo que es importante partir o tener en cuenta cuando hablamos de costos, es tener presente que los costos afectan principalmente a los pueblos indígenas en la medida de que es donde se están presentando mayores tasas de pobreza. En solo Latinoamérica, por ejemplo, el 45% de los pueblos indígenas están viviendo en situación de pobreza. Por lo tanto, todos los cambios o las situaciones que se presenten relacionadas con cambio climático los están afectando. Es importante tener presente también cómo la conexión que tienen los pueblos indígenas con los recursos naturales también es importante para considerar cuando hablamos del impacto que está teniendo para ellos, porque sabemos que todo lo que está pasando a nivel de cambio climático y la afectación sobre los recursos naturales afecta los medios de vida de las comunidades indígenas, en especial las que viven en los bosques. Por lo menos 70 millones de personas que pertenecen a pueblos indígenas viven en los bosques, y cualquier cambio que ocurra en los recursos naturales afecta sus medios de vida, así como todos los otros recursos de las comunidades, como son los recursos culturales, los recursos sociales, su capacidad de poder afrontar de la mejor manera estos retos que significan el cambio climático.
Also, I wanted to talk about the costs that specializes and centralizes in the Indigenous community. We're talking about high levels of poverty in them. Just in Latin America, 45% of the Indigenous communities live in poverty, and all of the changes that happen in climate change affect them, affect also the connection that they have with the natural resources, and the climate change also affects the way of living. Most of them, 70 million of them, live around the forests. So this also affects their lifestyles and also all of the cultural resources that they have.
Y lo que suceda con estos recursos naturales, obviamente, al afectar los medios de vida de los pueblos indígenas, también está generando situaciones de migración. Y estas situaciones de migración, pues también rompen ese vínculo que tienen las comunidades indígenas con sus recursos naturales. Muchos se mueven a ciudades o a otros lugares en donde no, lejos de su hábitat, lejos de su, donde desarrollaban sus actividades normales, y por lo tanto, además de perder sus actividades económicas, también están generándose dificultades para poder ubicarse en los nuevos lugares donde están, pero también al mismo tiempo para perder o tener que enfrentar muchos retos en términos de poder lograr. Por ejemplo, en el caso de las mujeres, se están enfrentando a situaciones de discriminación, están enfrentándose a situaciones en las cuales tienen que vincularse a trabajos mal remunerados o que igual no tienen que ver con su cultura. Entonces, ese tipo de retos están generando también una afectación en sus tradiciones. También está afectando la pérdida de su lenguaje y otras situaciones que también generan un impacto enorme para estas comunidades.
One moment for the interpreter. Awesome. So given that the natural resources are affecting their lifestyles, something that has happened with the Indigenous communities is the migration situation. Well, they break they're part of the Indigenous population and with their culture. So they have to go to cities, they have to go to other places far from where they're from where they were, and they start to lose themselves. And also it's very difficult for them to be a part of where they are. Sometimes they have to face bigger challenges and where they are now located. For example, women, they're now in situations of discrimination, and it's very hard to find jobs where they are properly paid. Also, they're not enjoying or being part of their culture. There's also other challenges that they have to face from their tradition, losing their language, and these are some of the challenges that they're facing.
Y finalmente quiero resaltar el tema, la necesidad de también el reconocimiento de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas, en especial con todos los retos que tienen que enfrentarse frente al tema de las tierras, el reconocimiento de sus territorios y que también obviamente es importante tenerlo en cuenta cuando hablamos de costos del cambio climático, en la medida en que las comunidades se les tiene que reconocer a las comunidades su derecho a decidir sobre sus territorios, a poder manejar sus territorios y obviamente a incidir en las políticas que están orientadas a mitigar o adaptarse al cambio climático.
And lastly, I also would like to talk about the necessity to recognize the Indigenous communities' rights and to their land and to their territory, to acknowledge them, that these are also the costs that climate change brings to them, to have them have the possibility to continue recognizing their territory.
Sorry, but I thought this format was different. I thought it was a different format. Sure. So I'm connecting the land with the determinants of health. So when you're displaced from the land, it affects many aspects of your health. Because all these determinants are occurring on the land. When you're dispossessed, you're removed from where you live and how the land affects your health. Next slide. So this is just a medicine wheel that has been used to represent the 4 seasons. And I found the image was very striking because you can almost sense the seasons, how extreme they are by the image. Next. So our collective health is connected to the land, to the earth. Next. When I did my doctorate, I developed this medicine wheel, the social determinants of health. And they're broken down into 4 aspects. So the wheel represents our life. There's a cultural aspect of our life. There's an environmental aspect. There's economic and social as well. So these are all impacted. Next slide. So these are some of the environmental factors. We need clean air. We need safe drinking water. But the pollution also affects our health. Poor sanitation and poor hygiene. It's going to affect your health. And when you talk about air pollution, that could be indoors or outdoors. You can get off-gassing from materials inside your home. Or you can track in dirt from outside into your home, like pesticides and stuff like that. And then it becomes a part of your indoor environment. So that will affect your health as well. And the last one is precarious housing and toxic wastes. Those are some of the environmental factors of health. And all 4 quadrants have to be in balance. Because when they become off balance, then everything is affected. They affect each other. Next. So these are some of the social factors. This can relate to a person, individual, or a community, or even a nation. So these are the person's social environments, as well as their social support networks, individually or from a community level. And when they mention health services, that also includes access to. Just because health services is provided doesn't mean you have access to them. Another factor is personal health practices at an individual level, plus their coping skills. And the last one is their education. For example, their health literacy, how knowledgeable they are about what's written about health. Next slide. And these are some of the cultural factors. Healthy child development within the culture. The second one, they mentioned culture itself. And then there's the biology and their genetic endowment. And the last one is gender. And those are probably more like the cultural constructs of gender. It depends on the culture they're in. So if these things are not manifested within their culture, it's going to affect their health. Next slide. And the last one are the economic factors. Being employment, income, as well as a person's social status. Next slide. So in North America, we use a medicine wheel for a lot of different teachings. And this is just an example of the Ojibwe. So there's 4 directions. There's the north, the east, the south, and the west. And each one is significant of a different value. For the north is respect. The east is wholeness. The south is interrelationships. And the west is everything is interconnected. So each one also represents a sacred color, like the white, the red, the yellow, and the black. They're always used. So depending on the culture or the tribe, they'll have different teachings and different colors. So there's one I heard before was the white represents the white man or Caucasian, and the red is Indian or indigenous people, and yellow is Asian. And black is African, people from Africa. And they would say those are the 4 colors of man. So in here they have 4 different quadrants: the mental, the spiritual, the physical, and the emotional. And these all have to be in balance. If you pay too much focus on one area, the other areas will suffer, and you will lose your balance. In such a way, your health will be affected. So that's why it's important to have the balance of those social determinants of health in those different quadrants. because when they become unbalanced, their health will be affected, not only your own health, but the planet's health as well. We believe that everything has spirit, everything lives, everything that is created comes from the Creator, has spirit, and it has the right to be here. So if animals are suffering and they're dying, it's because of us, humans. We're ignoring our relations with the animals. But we also believe plants are alive and have spirit. So when all these things become affected, we're impacting ourselves, whether we realize it or not. Next slide, please. And again, this is another example of the medicine wheel. And there's 4 sacred medicines that go with each quadrant. We have cedar and tobacco with sweetgrass and sage. And these are all used differently, depending on what people ask for. Cedar is usually used in like a tea, a herbal tea. Usually get the vitamin C from cedar. Tobacco is used in prayer, where we offer tobacco. It's a spirit offering. It's offering to the spirits, whether it's the spirit of the air, or the spirit of the forest, or the spirit of the ocean. So when we do a sacred pipe ceremony, we're smoking the tobacco. And we believe that our prayers are in the smoke. So when we blow the smoke out, our prayers are rising with the smoke. And we believe that the prayers will go to heaven, to the Creator. And sweetgrass is used for purification. When we do what we call a smudging ceremony. We look at the universe as a place that has positive and negative energies. And they can't occupy the same space. For instance, myself as an individual, I can't have a positive and negative energy in one spot. It has to be one or the other. One becomes dominant. And if you're having a bad day and you feel like it's giving you a bad mood, and you don't want to engage people in a bad mood, you want to be open-minded and open your heart and open your mind. You would smudge yourself so that you could get rid of those negative energies. And you would pray to the spirits that positive energies will occupy your space. Not just your space as an individual, because as an individual, you have your own spirit. But your own space could include your house, your home, your office, your classroom, your community. So we believe these are all gifts from the Creator. So the cedar is for our physical body. The tobacco is for our spiritual part of ourselves, for our prayer. And the sweetgrass and the sage are for the mental and the emotional aspects of ourselves. Mental well-being is important. Next slide. This is just a medicine wheel that's adapted for research. how to conduct research with indigenous communities. So I'm not going to go through the stages here, but I probably leave a copy of the PowerPoint, and if anybody would like access that, they can contact Choyce. Next slide. This is not so clear, but this is the Ojibwe medicine wheel. So in the center, you have the creator and yourself. So everybody's the center of their own circle. Because all around you there's 4 cardinal directions. But there's 7 directions in total. There's 4 cardinal directions. And there's usually a spirit associated with each one. And the way I was taught to pray was to begin in the East. We believe that life started in the East. And then we go to the South. The southern direction is the grandmother and the grandfather eagle. And when we pray to that direction, we ask those spirits to take anything that's negative away. And then when we get to the western direction, we acknowledge the first grandmother in the creation story. When she came into the world, she was already old and she was already wise. She was wise. So when we pray to that direction, we ask for wisdom and teachings from our first grandmother. And in the north is the direction for healing. We pray to the animal spirits. There's a bear, a grandfather bear. There's a grandfather wolf. Same ones there in the quadrants. And the eagles as well. So when we pray in that direction, we're asking these spirits to bring healing to us or to people we pray for. Like if we know people that are sick or dying, we pray for them. And we do that either with a pipe ceremony or within the sweat lodge. When you're in the sweat lodge, you're willing to suffer, enjoy the heat, and offer that sweat to show your sincerity of that healing. And just a short story about the medicine wheel. There was one elder, he was joking around. He said, we start from the eastern direction when we were born. We're 0 years old because we're newborn. And by the time you reach the southern direction, you're 25 years old. You're a young adult. And then you just keep going around the circle. And by the time you make it to the west, you're 75. And then you start your journey as an elder. It's your turn to teach the younger generations. So you keep your journey around the circle until you reach the north. And when you reach the north, you're about 100 years old, and you've lived a long life, and you're an old man by now, or an old woman. So you keep going along the circle until you come back to the east. And that's a complete life. You lived a complete life. So it's your time to go back where you came from, the Creator. So this elder was telling me that you come into this world, you're wrinkled, you're bald and you're toothless. And when you leave this world, you're the same way. You're wrinkled, you're bald, and you're toothless. We go back to the Creator. So, next slide. And that's it. This one here is somebody developed for when we were in COVID lockdown. These address the different aspects of individual health. Some things that you can do, activities. There's a spiritual self. You can perform an act of kindness. Take a moment to appreciate nature. One is to pray, go to a ceremony or a sweat. So the physical one is mostly physical activity. Take a walk in the woods, play with your pet, go swimming or take a walk, work out. And then the emotional aspect. Play a board game with the family, with your family or friends. Call a friend or a family member. And then for the intellectual aspect of the self, they list different activities as well. So you keep your balance of your individual circle when you're in a lockdown. So medicine wheels are always being adapted. They're not frozen in time. They're always being redeveloped, depending on the person that's using it to instruct. Next, I think that's the last one though. And that's a painting that's in Lennox Island, First Nation. They painted it on the ceiling. So that represents Tour de Line, or what we call North America. And that represents our Mother Earth. And there was a Lakota holy man. His name was Nicholas Black Elk. He said that everything that's alive on the earth has a rightful place on the wheel, a sacred hoop of life, whether it's humans, regardless of race or location. They'll have the right to be on that hoop of life. And it's not just humans, it's all life. All spirit has the right to exist. Maybe I should get back to the question.
So what are some of the costs you have seen in the areas in which you work and live? The costs of climate change?
I think the biggest cost that's being coming about now is being dispossessed. So when you're removed from the land, you can no longer do a lot of these activities. So that's going to affect your culture. It's going to affect your society. It's going to affect economics, your mental health. And I noticed there's a lot of my students at UPEI. They're talking about climate stress, and it's affecting their mental health. They have to worry about exams and their grades. Now they have to worry about this as well. And that's a major cost.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to hear from fellow panelists on this as well, and I wrote down some notes for myself personally, and also just thinking about making the connections. I wrote down thinking about the connections and some of the information that Fredy shared for Colombia, how that also includes Guatemala, of course. And then also what Patrick was talking about. And so some of the things, on a very personal note, personally, I was not affected by the flooding that happened this summer in Nova Scotia, but, neighbors were. And it was, the mental health of that is seeing that and then them worrying and continuing to worry. So that's definitely a cost. And then also wildfires that happened in Nova Scotia as well. I had some friends who were homes were lost in that. So rural Nova Scotia, rural Maritimes. And then for my current work, the knowledge of that northern Canada has a higher degree of temperature change, ice melting. It's heating up faster than other places in the world. The effects of that in terms of there for as long. Ice on lakes or on the ocean or the sea are not there, so less ability for transportation on snowmobiles. So, thinking about a few of those different parts and then other countries, parts of the world, in general, a lot of rural areas have less disposable income, so we know that is the case. And also, in general, the increase in daily cost of living is affecting all of us, some to more degrees than others. And thinking about, in the Maritimes, a stronger connection to the land for settlers, for fishing, farming, and then also thinking about the Indigenous groups as pointed out, the connection to land as well, for livelihood, for culture. Those are some of those costs that I have seen. And I wanted also to say too that Graham Reed is with the American Policy Group out West Canada. But I heard him recently say that the illness is greed and the symptom is climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions, those are the symptoms of illness, and illness is greed. So I just thought that was impactful. Wanted to say that again.
Can everyone hear me? All right, wonderful. So thank you all for answering. My apologies to Sophia. I did not give Sophia a proper introduction. Thank you very much for your hard work. And Patrick, my apologies for the miscommunication. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very insightful. And you weren't here for this morning, but we spoke a lot about localization, and your work is very much embedded in localization from a very Indigenous perspective. So I think we all learned a lot, and it's a way that we can carry these ideas forward. I believe that we'll have time for one, perhaps two questions before the Q&A. So we will jump into effects of climate change. That's kind of hard to avoid, and the costs of climate change are very related to the effects. We know that the effects are far-reaching, that they impact our economy, they affect our social structures, our food chains, our biodiversity, and more. We could list for a very long time. But there's some disagreement as to which effects are the most urgent to address.
And, oh, sorry about that, the most urgent to address. And this plays out very differently on local stages, on the national stage, international stage. What are some of the challenges in navigating and balancing these various needs, and how can that translate into immediate action? I think we'll give Janelle the voice first, and we'll make our way down the line.
Thank you. I didn't write down the question. Great. There we go. So I didn't have as much written down here. Maybe I was hoping I'd get some inspiration from co-panelists, but I do have some thoughts. In general, and whether or not this tackles the question perfectly, what I've discovered over a couple decades now of working with different groups, volunteering, etc., is, and this is becoming more and more pertinent in current realities, is ensure as many groups are involved. And groups, environmental NGOs, community groups, different sectors, arts groups, health, emergency management organizations, municipalities, provincial governments, Indigenous governments and communities. Include as many as possible to get the fuller picture of what the cost of climate change is and the impacts. I can see it from my personal point of view, my backyard, literally. Now, I see more through current work. Yeah, I wrote that down as being very important. Also, newcomers to Canada, or even newcomers to the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada. Racialized groups are also important to include. People who work in healthcare in various ways. As we've been talking about, climate change affects health, physical and mental. And so just trying to really ensure as many people are brought to the table as possible, I think it's very important.
Okay, thank you. Bueno, obviamente uno de los grupos o de las acciones que consideramos de acuerdo a lo que hemos trabajado es el promover las acciones que están haciendo las comunidades locales y obviamente los pueblos indígenas para la protección de los bosques. Todos sabemos la conexión que existe con los bosques y el cambio climático y con los demás recursos que también pueden contribuir a mitigarlo, y obviamente también el conocimiento de los pueblos indígenas, que también puede contribuir a promover la adaptación al cambio climático. Entonces, el trabajo con los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales es muy importante para contribuir como tarea prioritaria en este proceso.
Obviously, one of the actions that we considered is the work that we've been doing to promote action in the Indigenous communities. We all know the connection that the Indigenous communities have with the forests, so it's working with them and also contributing to the communities and also helping them with the knowledge and how to adapt with climate change. So it's been mostly about the work that we've been doing with the Indigenous communities.
Y aquí quiero enfatizar que los pueblos indígenas son el 5% de la población mundial, pero no sé si tienen conocimiento, pero los pueblos indígenas protegen el 80% de la biodiversidad que está en el planeta, porque están ubicados en estas zonas estratégicas en donde es necesario protegerlas para poder afrontar todos los retos que implica el cambio climático.
I want to highlight something that's very important, and it's that the Indigenous communities make up 5% of the world population, but the Indigenous communities help to protect 80% of biodiversity, given that they're located in the strategic areas in which they live. So it's the importance of continuing helping.
En ese sentido, como lo mencionaron los demás panelistas, efectivamente, el promover y cuidar, proteger la conexión que existe con los pueblos indígenas y con los bosques es una acción estratégica frente al cambio climático, y esto obviamente está conectado con la protección de sus derechos, promover sus derechos, pero también la generación de capacidades para que puedan para que puedan proteger estos bosques y puedan contribuir a aumentar nuestro conocimiento sobre las medidas de adaptación y mitigación al cambio climático.
So according also to what the other panelists have said and what we've talked about, it's about promoting and also protecting the Indigenous communities given to their connection with the forests. We have to find strategic ways to continue teaching them about the climate change, how we can continue taking care of it by giving them the rights that they need, and also by generating the capacity to continue protecting the forests. So it's all about looking ways and how we can adapt and also mitigate the climate change.
¿Qué acciones prácticas podría sugerir dentro? Es una lista enorme, pero podría mencionar algunas como apoyarles con su generación de capacidades para que puedan proteger el bosque, para recuperarlo en algunas zonas donde hay problemas de deforestación, proyectos de generación de ingresos que estén conectados con acciones en el bosque, por ejemplo, proyectos de agroforestería. En muchas zonas, por ejemplo, los pueblos indígenas también requieren apoyo para acciones de emergencia generadas por el cambio climático, como los incendios u otros fenómenos climáticos. Y bueno, hasta ahí, y finalizaré con uno.
So what practical actions can we talk about? Do I recommend? Well, there's a long list, but I can just mention a few. We can start off by supporting the capacity, the generation of capacity with the community, the Indigenous communities. We can teach them to continue protecting them, how we can also recover forests from deforestation. Also, we can do projects that generate income, but also take care of the forests. For example, I'm not sure of this word, agroforestry, and also the knowledge of how to deal with emergencies. For example, that's the word, of fires and other emergencies.
Y finalmente quiero enfatizar en la importancia de acompañar y orientar a los pueblos indígenas para entender su participación en el mercado de carbono, en el sentido en que ellos puedan conocer, familiarizarse con todo lo que involucra este mercado, porque también en diferentes espacios han manifestado que que este mercado se está haciendo muchas veces sin respetar los procesos de consulta previa, libre e informada, y también tener en cuenta sus sistemas de gobernanza, su cosmovisión y muchos otros procesos que ellos desarrollan.
And finally, I would also like to highlight the importance of having this, of accompanying the Indigenous communities, especially in the carbon market. They want to know more about it. They want to be more familiarized about it. They want to be opened into these carbon markets, but most of these do not respect or do not have any feedback or consultation with them. So I also mentioned that we also have to understand their systems of governancy, and also to understand more about them.
En general, es importante resaltar eso, respetar la cosmovisión de los pueblos indígenas, su autodeterminación para decidir sobre su futuro, promover su conexión con la tierra, con sus recursos naturales, es una de las estrategias claves para promover la mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático.
Also, so generally, I just want to highlight the importance of continuing respecting their governancy, their auto-cosmo look upon everything, and to also promote their ways of taking care of the earth, and also to continue strategically working alongside them so we can mitigate all of the effects that climate change are bringing.
Could you repeat the question again? I had it printed. I had it printed out, but I left it in the car.
No problem. What are some of the challenges in navigating and balancing the various needs of biodiversity loss, food chain issues, the various effects of climate change at the various levels, local, regional, national, international? How do we balance those, and how can that translate into immediate action?
I think one of the biggest challenges is responsibility. A lot of people tend to shirk responsibility, especially when you look at the globe as north and south, east and west. You see movements of capital, and those movements have impacts on the climate. So it's very hard to address those issues when it's almost like a denial. If you're addicted to greed, you have to admit you're addicted before you can address it. And that's where the mitigation would have to start. And how do you transfer resources from the east to somewhere like Bangladesh, where they're getting all flooded? They don't have those types of resources. The people that are most impacted by climate change have been stripped of their resources, and now they're footing the bill while everybody's living comfortably. I think the scariest effects are the ones that we can't see. So we probably won't see them in our generation. It'll be the next generation that will be seeing the effects. I remember my mother telling me once, after the hurricane season, she would look at the sky and she would look at the clouds, and she would say that the clouds are changing. So the cold weather is going to come. It's like the tropical climate comes north, and then once it bypasses the Maritimes, that there's an Arctic air that comes down right away, and that hits us before winter comes. And there's something I noticed lately is a lot of our seasons are coming either too early or too late. So one of the things that Indigenous people used to do was predict the weather by looking at their environment. And now that's something we probably can't do anymore. We have to adapt to these changes. And I'm not sure how the weather people are going to analyze that kind of data when it becomes no longer pertinent. Although they keep records for 100 years. Do they keep them for 1,000?
Thank you all very much for your answers. It's been so insightful. Now, technically, we only have a little bit less than 10 minutes left, but we started a little late, so I'm going to go about 5 minutes late. I hope the audience forgives me. I have one very important question because we have the very unique opportunity to have such strong Indigenous perspectives here between Dr. Augustine and between Fredy as well. So I'd be really remiss if I didn't ask this question. So I know it'll be hard, but I'm going to ask for the two of you to keep your answers brief, and then we'll have time for about a 10-minute Q&A. One of the most common and well-deserved criticisms of climate action on the international stage and in several nations is the colonial ideals and methods, which are the most commonly used and the most commonly debated. Indigenous peoples, as you have said, remain one of the groups most adversely affected by climate change, and yet they're the ones most acting on climate change, especially at the grassroots level. That's mitigation, that's adaptation. What costs do Indigenous peoples face that the settler peoples of a region may not see? And more importantly, or just as importantly, sorry, what ways can settler peoples help support their local Indigenous peoples in offsetting some of those costs that the Indigenous people unfairly burden? I'll start with Fredy and then we'll hand it over to Patrick.
Creo que me demoraré un poco porque algo mencioné en la anterior respuesta y es el reto que existe actualmente para que los pueblos indígenas se vinculen a estos proyectos de compensación por las acciones que realizan para cuidar los bosques o los recursos naturales. Y hablaba inicialmente sobre el mercado de carbono.
Thank you. I will talk a little bit more, given that it's a very good question, but I did answer some things when I talked before. But the main challenge that exists with the Indigenous communities is to be a part of projects that have compensation for their actions that they've been taken when taking care of the natural resources. So I also mentioned and talked about the carbon market.
Y quería enfatizar en esto porque es un ejemplo de cómo muchos procesos que se hacen para el trabajo con los pueblos indígenas no están teniendo en cuenta la cosmovisión, y es necesario que muchos de estos conceptos puedan vincularse a las comunidades para que puedan contribuir desde su visión, cómo pueden mejorarse y obviamente cómo pueden entrar a participar de acuerdo a la visión que tienen en torno a su interés de hacerlo. Esto involucra entonces entender los conceptos, crear modelos con los pueblos indígenas, implementar los procesos de consulta previa libre e informada y obviamente reconocer el conocimiento ancestral y la conexión que tienen los pueblos indígenas con su territorio, con los recursos naturales, incluido el bosque.
So this is an example that I wanted to highlight because it talks about a lot of the processes that the Indigenous communities do, but that they don't take into account the cosmovision. It's necessary to understand the vision that they have inside of their community. It's also important to make them participate, but also to have the vision of what they see and have it into account. Also, we would need to talk about understanding the concepts. We have to create models. We have to also implement processes where we also ask them and where we get feedback according to what they say. But also we have to take into account their knowledge and respect their ancestral knowledge on natural resources and climate, and especially the forests too.
Additional costs do Indigenous peoples face that settler peoples may not see? And in what ways can settler peoples support their local Indigenous peoples in offsetting these costs?
Well, getting back to my presentation, all the social determinants of health were connected to the land. So one of the losses for Indigenous people is access to land to practice their culture. And because there's a lot of settler people in our traditional territories, they haven't lost anything. So a way that they can help is allowing local Indigenous communities access to land.
Absolutely, Janelle, a fellow settler beside me, but has some perspectives to share as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about next steps. You know, for 5-ish years now, we've been doing land acknowledgements at events. That's a step. There's lots more steps in truth and reconciliation. And so I've been thinking about this a bit more. And so, you know, throw it out there as an idea and trying to work and bring this into other spaces where I work and volunteer is donating money to organizations for land back, for language, for different councils, and, you know, the Native Council of PEI, the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. So I've been trying to think, like, what is the next step as a settler person that I can take? Yes, acknowledging what land I live and play on, where we are today, and then what? So I just wanted to throw that idea out there, trying to, you know, create some momentum or put another thought in people's heads around that.
Well, the fact of the matter is that when it comes to oppression, most people in the oppressor class only listen to the people in the same oppressor class. So the perspectives of the Indigenous peoples are important, and it's important that we listen to them and then take our fellow settlers and hold them to account as well. Thank you all very much. We do have time for a very brief Q&A. If we have any questions in the audience, we can either have people come up here or have the microphone brought to them, and online questions as well. Do we have any questions from the audience?
This question is particularly for Fredy, but Patrick and Janelle can certainly answer too. When we talk about climate change, I think we're really talking about climate crisis. And certainly what I've seen in Guatemala is the massive change in biodiversity related to forests, related to settlers putting cattle in massively instead of forests, and that it's almost too late. I'm just wondering how you are seeing deforestation in South America, the Amazon, and so on. To what degree is it still possible for transformation, and how much do Indigenous people have to struggle and face repression in order to save forests? How much do Indigenous groups have to struggle to maintain what forests there are, and at what cost to them?
Okay. Okay. Creo que entendí. Creo que algo mencioné durante mi intervención, la importancia de que los pueblos indígenas puedan tener la capacidad de participar en procesos de toma de decisiones relacionados con la protección de los bosques y obviamente también con fortalecer sus capacidades y su independencia, su autonomía para hacerlo.
Also, I did mention something about that when I had my intervention, but when we're talking about the Indigenous communities, we're talking about them having the capacity, to helping them have the capacity, to help them participate in the decision making, and also to talk about the protection of the forests. We're also talking about increasing their capacities and increasing their knowledge.
Usted específicamente habló de Guatemala, en donde casualmente hay unos procesos muy importantes en donde pueblos indígenas están liderando procesos para la protección del bosque, pero han sido gracias al reconocimiento de su derecho sobre la tierra y sobre la posibilidad de poder encontrar oportunidades económicas alternas en el manejo forestal. Por ejemplo, yo mencioné algo, actividades agroforestales, turismo sostenible, comercialización, el manejo forestal para comercializar de manera sostenible productos que se obtienen del bosque, porque además el bosque no únicamente hay que pensarlo en términos de madera, sino que también hay muchos servicios ecosistémicos que tiene el bosque y que estas comunidades, con su conocimiento ancestral, nos pueden enseñar de cómo utilizarlas, de cómo conectarlas con sus oportunidades económicas.
So you mentioned Guatemala, and actually in Guatemala, there's a process with the indigenous communities where there are leading processes in the projects with the forests. But this is given that they have been granted and recognized their rights to their territory and also the possibility to create alternative incomes to them. For example, something that I mentioned was the agroforestry, sustainable tourism, and also how to manage the forest. Now, when we're talking about the sustainability of forests, we can't only think about wood. They also, given to the knowledge and their ancestral knowledge that they have, they know how to use it and how to use the forest and also turn it into something that generates income for them.
That was very interesting. In the Atlantic region, the worst deforestation that we have is clear cut. You get mechanical harvester and you just drive through and clear everything down. Oddly enough, we used to have caribou in the Maritimes. And there's places named Caribou, like Caribou, Maine, and Caribou Island. But that was they were all lost because of the forestry, dragging logs in caribou habitat. They had nothing to eat after. So that's how we lost caribou. And in my language, when we say somebody's jealous, we say they're oliboozed. They're acting like a caribou. Because a caribou would stomp the ground with its foot, looking for something to eat under the snow. Some people say I look younger than my age. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'll give you a hint. I was about 9 years old during the summer of love. So I've been around the block a few times. I remember when the Supreme Court of Canada came down with the Donald Marshall Jr. ruling. And all the people, Indigenous people, were so happy to go into the fishery to make some money, to find employment, feed their families. And one of the initial responses that we faced was, well, it's okay, you can go fish. Just do it in a canoe. Go in the canoe and you can fish lobster. But to flip that around would be, it's okay, you can cut your logs, but you're gonna have to use a hatchet and haul them out with a pony. But it's all based on scale. I remember my father used to use a buck saw and a bobsled to cut pulp. So that was small scale. But today they're using mechanical harvesters you get one individual driving the machine, and they could take so much logs in one day, incomparable to what one individual could have done 100 years ago. And things really began to change in the industry when they started driving trucks and the logs. Because my ancestors were involved in river drives. They used to get paid by taking the logs down the river to the mill. So it all becomes scale. When you increase the scale and you increase the production, but you also increase the profit. You increase the profit, you increase the harm. So there's also increased impacts as well. Believe it or not, there was an Indian agent in my reserve, the Richbuck Reserve number 15 in New Brunswick. His last name was Irvin. He was paid to go on the Indian Reserve and take a look at the amount of trees they had to assess the forests. And now we have urban woodlands that are doing monoculture. They grow nothing but black spruce because that's what grows the fastest. But you don't see much of biodiversity in a monoculture of black spruce. All you see is a bunch of trees that are lined up in a row, driving by on the highway. But if you were driving a four-wheeler along a trail somewhere, or a skidoo, you would really see what's behind the facade. They leave like a buffer zone between the road and what they cut. So you don't really see what's behind that facade. It might look good, all these trees lined up, and all these billboards about what urban is doing, all the jobs they're creating. But a lot of their money is going offshore. So they're not really giving back to the economy. When you're hiding your money offshore, you're not paying the taxes. And those taxes don't go to services that the poor people really need. So we end up in PEI with people that are homeless, and they're trying to hide their misery by injecting, self-medicating. And then we start worrying about safe injection sites for these people. So we have to scale down, I think, regardless of what we're harvesting. I think it's too late to put the brakes. I get really concerned because even the Pope is making statements about climate change. So when somebody like him starts speaking out, then you know things are bad.
Well, it is just about 4 o'clock now, so our Q&A will have to be short, but thank you all very much. Thank you very much to Dr. Patrick Augustine. Thank you very much to Fredy Duqes, and thank you very much to Janelle Frail for joining us and sharing their expertise and insights today. I really feel like I learned a lot, and thank you to the audience for attending, whether that's in person or virtual. You've all been wonderful.